All right, so let's get on over to the first slide where it says the art and science of entrepreneurship, which is what we're going to try to do, chi-hua, in about 40 minutes, which is the length of 2 TED Talks. We better get at it. The approach that we're going to use, everyone, is I'm going to more or less do a play-by-play. We're feeding off the sports analogy because there's a Super Bowl in the United States on Sunday, and then shortly thereafter there's the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Russia. So we'll just stay on that theme, and this is the year of the World Cup as well. So, chi-hua, you get to be the color commentary or advisor, analyst. I get to yell "goal" at one point, but you can jump in anytime we want.
All right, let's do it.
So we are sitting in Silicon Valley, and what is it? It's this landmass on this planet around San Francisco and San Jose, but it really, in our view, is a state of mind. So the things that we're going to discuss about the art and science of entrepreneurship can be seen through a Silicon Valley lens. That's where we live and it's where we study. chi-hua was a student of mine, I'm proud to say, 15 years ago, before he started his distinguished career. So here we are, using Silicon Valley as a lab, but there are lots of Silicon Valley type clusters all over the world. So we believe that the things we're going to talk about over the next half hour are applicable anywhere on the planet. So let's talk about, well, what do we mean by entrepreneurship? So I'll give you the opportunity here to chime in.
Well, I totally agree with you, Tom. I think it's a state of mind. It's about solving problems that you're passionate about in a creative and scrappy way. And that really applies anywhere. It's simply a way of thinking. An example I'll give you is our friend Daniel Ek, who's the founder of Spotify. He was sitting in Sweden, and he was incredibly frustrated with the fact that he could not pay to legally download music. And so he came up with a product and a service that enabled people all the world around to subscribe to an unlimited library of music and pay a monthly fee. Now, not everyone is going to be a Daniel Ek. Not everybody is going to start a company like Spotify, but within your own companies, in your communities, in your homes, you can apply entrepreneurial thinking to identify problems that you're really passionate about, and you solve them in a creative way.
Well, let me build on that, and I don't know how many times they're going to probably say that in the next half hour because you always say interesting things, but let me build on that by saying, look, there's a lot of variations to the word entrepreneurship, and us academics are always trying to figure out how to crystallize them. So we better do just definitions first. These variations range from the entrepreneur Daniel, as you mentioned, or the Zuckerbergs, the Michael Dell, the Bill Gates type, all the way to discussion of entrepreneurial ecosystems or clusters, which I've mentioned. Start saying, hey, Silicon Valley is a cluster, but frankly, it's repeated in all kinds of other habitats around the world. What we're going to do, though, in the interest of time, is look at the two in the middle. And that is entrepreneurship as a process, so maybe you could call that science of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurial, the adjective, as attitudes and skills and behaviors, in other words, the art. So let's do that and bound it that way. So thanks, Paul, for talking about the fact that I've got a textbook. In fact, today, the 4th edition of this textbook is available.
Congratulations, Tom. Awesome.
Yeah, just 2 years of a lot of coffee and a wonderful co-author in Andrew Nelson. And so we continually look at this issue of, okay, if we're talking about entrepreneurship and we're talking about technology entrepreneurship, which is another way of saying high growth entrepreneurship, scalable businesses, not small businesses, but scalable large businesses like what you're trying to do with Spotify or what you did when you invested in Twitter or before that in your early investment in Facebook. We are trying to look at what's the principles associated with that. A good friend has a way of breaking it into 2 parts, opportunity recognition and pursuit of opportunity. Up above, you see this collision of products and markets, so we're going to talk about some principles having to do with that. And then down below, where in the pursuit of opportunity, we're going to look at some principles around resources and capital and people and organizations. So we've got this down to 7 principles. Now, that's a wordy slide. Very, very aware of that. These are archived, so I won't step through each one, but that's what we're going to do over the next half an hour. So let's get started. First one is simply put, why is your venture a a opportunity, not just an idea. And I want to make a couple of comments at the macro level, and I'm going to turn it over to chi-hua from his vantage point as an investor. At a macro level, there are a lot of problems in this planet to solve. And it's not going to stop. You can spend a lifetime going to go solve the challenges that we're facing in digital and physical infrastructure, which a lot of people think of when they think of entrepreneurship. But frankly, it covers the full spectrum of sustainability to security to health and education. Obviously, I'm trying to solve big problems in education as a academic entrepreneur. chi-hua tends to invest in digital infrastructure kind of companies, but there's a broader spectrum of big problems out there to be solved. On the other side, the push, if you will, there's technologies that are just fantastic right now, and look back over a couple hundred years, back to railroads, which is, this university, Stanford, was started out of somebody who did well in railroads, to my own career in software over a wave a decade ago or two. Now we have a wave of just incredible technologies, and we have more time, we could go into that. But there's not only great problems out there to be solved, but there's great technologies taking place. So that's the macro level. But chi-hua, as an investor, I know you think about those things, but what criteria do you use, or do investors use, when deciding which entrepreneurial team to back?
Well, this is the age-old debate, Tom. In Silicon Valley and in entrepreneurial centers and investing centers around the world, people ask, is it about the market? Is it about the product? Mm-hmm. Is it about the team? Now, I'm going to split the baby, so to speak. Unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a single answer, but I think it really depends upon the stage of the company that we're talking about. In a very early stage company, if two entrepreneurs walk into my office and they say, hey, I want to start a company, here's an idea, here's a presentation, what do you think? Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the presentation and I'm looking at the idea, but I'm really looking at those two people. Mm-hmm. What is the quality of that team? What is the quality of their thinking? Because more likely than not, 90% of what they have in that presentation is not going to end up coming true, but it's the approach that they take, because if they're high-quality people and they're experts in their field, they'll navigate their way to a set of solutions. Now, if it's a little bit later on and those two people are a team of 10 and they've got an initial product and they're coming in there and asking for investment, then the question that I'd start to ask is, what's the quality of the product? Have you really built a better product here, and is it something that can take significant market share? Now, if it's a company of 100 people and they're coming in and they're looking to raise 20, 30, $50 million, the question that I have to ask is, okay, so it seems like you've got a good team, seems like you've built a good product, but ultimately, how large is this market? Is this a market that can yield a $100 million business, or is it a market that can yield a $2 billion business? And ultimately, that becomes the determining factor.
Well, very good. So now let's dive into some of those things you just said. I mean, this is essentially a wonderful way to give us momentum into a few more questions. One of my favorite questions that comes up in our entrepreneurship courses is, what's your competitive positioning or elevator pitch? And that sounds like a lot of MBA language there with positioning. But the casual term is elevator pitch. So what's behind all that? It's essentially talking about strategy. And this book that's been around for over 20 years, and what I'm also happy to share, because Jeff Moore is a good friend of our program here and contributor, he is bringing out a new edition of Crossing the Chasm this week, where it talks about how a lot of the entrepreneurs you just mentioned, they may have some early success, they have a little bit of momentum, but they have trouble getting to scale. They have trouble reaching escape velocity, all those analogies. And that model has been a popular way of explaining that chasm or that gulf that happens in between there, where a lot of startups, carcasses lie. All right, so what is behind that? Well, we use it as a teaching tool to get at what is the elevator pitch? And it's common now to call that the story. What is the story of the venture? And that's the description of the product and the market. So how exciting is it? This is a teaching exercise that we do, where we take a template, a 2-sentence template, where the first sentence, imagine as an engineering professor, of course I imagine this way, that's the x-axis. And that is what is the value to the customer? I got cut off a little bit there, but that's what's going on there. The value to the customer, value proposition. And the y-axis, and in other words, that would be, why should anybody care at all? And then the y-axis is about, well, why is it that this particular group of entrepreneurs or this team, this startup, why is it unique? They're solving somebody's problem, but why are they solving it better than anybody else? And I'm putting an example here of a student team doing this with what is a fun car to see driving around, at least our area every once in a while, a Tesla sedan.
Very popular.
Yeah, it's in the news, and there's an example of great value pushing way out the x-axis and great uniqueness pushing way up the y-axis, and that's of course where you want to be, is up and to the right. How does this jive with the kinds of things you hear when you hear pitches or elevator stories?
Yeah, so the best pitches are super simple. They can be expressed in a single sentence. And I think they offer two things. They offer a distinctive and compelling message, and the product offers a disruptively better value propositions. And the example I use is one that I'm sure everybody on the phone and the webcast here knows, which is Google. So Google has a very distinctive and compelling message, which is find anything on the internet. Their search engine, not all their other products, but let's just talk about their search engine. Mm-hmm. Find anything on the internet. That's a simple message that any customer or potential customer of Google can understand in a single sentence. What they also offered, and this goes to your uniqueness point, is they offered a disruptively better value proposition. When they launched, I remember I was your student, Tom, in 1999, and they did their launch announcement down in the steps of the Gates building here at Stanford. And at the time, we had Yahoo, we had Metacrawler, mm-hmm. we had a bunch of these search engines where if you typed in a search term, you could spend a few minutes paging through the results, clicking through. You might end up on the fourth, fifth, sixth page to find the answer that you were looking for. And Google came along, and pretty much in 95 or 98% of the cases, the answer you were looking for was one of those first three links. And that ended up becoming a disruptively better value proposition that enabled them to take massive market share in a very short amount of time and create a $200, $300 billion company.
Well, thanks for that story. Well, let's, in explanation, let's keep right on rolling. Let's go to number 3 out of 7, which is how much cash do you have? And by the way, these are phrased in a way that the people on the webinar are entrepreneurs, and it's a little bit of a simulation, and because I think all of us have a little bit of entrepreneur in our hearts, and whether you are thinking about a standalone venture or whether you're working in a corporation right now or a university or in public service, and just you want to be a change maker. So with that in mind, we're just putting it in that context to make it personal. So how much cash do you have right now? What are your major sources of capital? All right, so here's what's interesting. Entrepreneurs always know how much cash they have on hand. If we were all in a great big auditorium here together or at the football stadium or something, I could poll, and there's entrepreneurs would say, yes, I have this many euros or this many yen or this many dollars.
Oftentimes this many months.
This many months? They would do it that way. But those of us working in large enterprises, we'd have a hard time. We'd have to Google it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll turn it around. I don't know how much cash Stanford University has on its balance sheet right now. I just know I'm going to get paid in a couple of weeks.
There's more than a few months of cash.
Right, but it's amazing to watch entrepreneurs always say, "Oh, I've got X." All right, so let's let that be. But the issue is it's usually not enough to get to profitability. Maybe it might be, but it's not enough to sustain operations in that given month. They need investment. So where does that come from? Well, I want to tell a quick story. A couple of years ago, I was so honored to teach at the Stanford campus in Florence, and the book I used for a course on entrepreneurship was the textbook, plus this book called Medici Money. People in this seminar probably are a little surprised we're talking about the Medicis, but the theme of that book was no bankers, no Renaissance. That if the Medicis had not been there in the 1400s, then Michelangelo and Da Vinci, all these wonderful things in art, but especially in science and technology, would not have happened. So that begs the question, as I talk to a venture capitalist, is it really no venture capitalists, no Silicon Valley? And we could have we could debate this all day long, but let's at least make the point that it's worthwhile understanding venture capital and other sources of capital. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, yeah.
All right, so let's throw up a really busy slide, but it's an important one. Along the x-axis is, here we go with, engineering graphs again, but decreasing risk. It shows from the idea stage of a company that's friends, families, and fools, all the way over to profitability, which would be traditional banks or initial public offering. And then it shows in the y-axis the increasing investment size. So look at all those different sources of capital. And my question I want to talk to chi-hua about is, what are the major trends in venture finance today? So let's go back there and see what you think.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple really powerful megatrends, Tom. The first is that it's cheaper than ever to start companies, but more expensive than ever to scale them. So a company can be started in a dorm room using Amazon Web Services and using open source software for like
Dropbox did that, right?
$2,000, $5,000, right? Y Combinator is starting these companies for under $30,000, and that's extraordinary for less than the cost of a luxury sedan. You can start a company.
Much less than a Tesla.
Yeah, end up being billions of dollars, right? Yet, at the same time, it's more expensive than ever to scale them. You see these companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars before they go public. And the reason is because the markets are so enormous in IT, and the cost of talent is so high that in order to take full advantage of the market opportunity, companies have to scale very, very quickly, and that's expensive. I think a second mega trend in venture capital is the shift towards more service-intensive venture capital firms. Venture capital used to be very much just a cottage industry of, a handful of people on Sand Hill practicing this business, syndicating their investments with one another and sharing risk. Now, entire consulting firms are essentially being built inside of venture capital firms to provide services that go top to bottom, including financing services, business development services, recruiting services, marketing services. And finally, I think at a macro level, there is a significant increase. It's not quite 1999. Probably it's healthy that it's not, but IPO volume is up significantly, and large tech M&A is back now, multi-billion-dollar tech M&A.
Really insightful. And I just want to I see from some input here from our folks online that we want a couple of clarification of terms. So can we do that? VC, right there in the middle. What do we mean by venture capital as opposed to those others?
So venture capital is its own asset class. In general, venture capitalists get money from institutions like Stanford University, like Hewlett and Packard Foundation, like the General Motors Pension, and put it in the form of a fund that then invests in individual companies on behalf of those limited partners seeking to generate a very high rate of return. And what's unique about venture capital, that middle section there, is it's a sizable amount of investment and at the same time has extremely high risk associated with it. So like if your grandmother lent you $100 to start a lemonade stand, it's not a huge deal if you lost that $100. Venture capitalists are in the business of investing $1 to $20 million, sometimes as much as $50 million in very, very high-risk enterprises.
Okay, and let's explain a couple of other ones here. FFF is a bit of humor. It is friends, families, and fools. Which I've been one on occasion. I invested in a movie once. I would call that foolish. And then strategic partners. What do I mean by that?
Strategic partners would be a much larger company that might help your small
corporation
company be successful.
Like
so
pharmaceutical companies.
In you, or if
pharmaceuticals, Google,
Time Warner, if you're a media company, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Intel, if you're a chip company.
Yes. All right. Okay. Good. So let's move on to number 4 out of 7. All right. As a hypothesis-driven lean startup, what is the major risk to reduce ASAP? So there's that phrase, lean startup, which has become an incredibly important term in entrepreneurship education lately. Let's see if we can understand it. Conventionally, the way entrepreneurs and their teams conversed with people like chi-hua and investors and others in their ecosystems is that they would talk about, look, my job is to reduce risk, and I've identifying the most important risk for 2014, and we're going to go after that. Whether it's the product or technology work, that'd be technology risk. Do we have the right team? Is our market big enough? Or even or can we ever raise enough capital to get it done? Because not everything is as inexpensive to do as software, right? All right, so what's happened is this has been taken and rarefied by a number of wonderful thought leaders, saying that, look, the business plan isn't so important as the business model. This is how the company makes money. And in the search for that scalable business model, that's much more important than writing a spiffy business plan. So that's why you see this slide here. So let's go on and look at the contribution made by a fellow in Europe who wrote a book called Business Model Generation. His name is Osterwalder. And you see this canvas here. It looks a little complicated, but it really isn't. The top left boxes, the three there, are the internal operations of the firm, the startup. They make a pitch, a value proposition, like we talked about earlier, to a set of clients, customers and distribution channels to reach those customers. And ultimately, more revenue needs to come in than costs, so they can live on their own accord and on investors. That mapping is nice. It's a canvas. Great. But then it's the posting of or a way to test the hypothesis in each one of those components of the company. And this created a movement around something called Lean Startup that it even had a cover story by one of our adjunct professors, Steve Blank, called Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything. So we teach that. We urge people to learn all about it. There's great ways to do that. But the question I have for you is, that's ship and test philosophy. In other words, do a minimally viable product, which is the term they use, and then get it out right away, like you were describing, because it's so cheap to do that, say, in software, and then test it, even if it doesn't work very well. Is that always better or always more appropriate than the perfect and launch?
So in the area where I spend most of my time, Tom, the answer is yes. In consumer software, it's the kind of business and the kind of product where you can change things overnight. So you ship a product, it's not working quite right, you ship a bug fix. Facebook has a legendary example of this, where the first few years of the company's existence, maybe even up to 5 years or so, any engineer could push code live without QA once a day. And they were serving hundreds of millions of people already. Because, you know why? If it broke, and during that period of time, there were a lot of things that broke, they just roll it back the next day, and things would be fine. Now, if you're shipping a car, if you're testing, it's fairly unlikely that you
don't want your batteries to catch on fire.
Exactly. It's fairly unlikely that you could push a new build of the car every day. So you much more need to be in the perfect and launch business. And so I think it's dangerous to say ship and test the philosophy that is appropriate for every single market and category.
But with that said, talking to customers and partners and so forth, that's fine.
Yeah. So I think there's the myth of the entrepreneur, which is the brilliant genius who goes into a dark room with no windows and comes up with something amazing, and it's the next iPhone. That's really not the way entrepreneurship works. You need to be in close touch with the customer. You need to be testing your ideas with the customer and understanding what their needs are so that you can satisfy those needs. You might not show them the whole product, but you certainly will give them the opportunity or seek feedback on the features of the product that you're building.
All right. Thanks for that. So let's go to number 5, which is the start of our last 3, 5, 6, and 7, having to do with people and team. Some people like to call entrepreneurship an extreme team sport. Since we started this with the analogies of the Super Bowl and the World Cup and the Olympics, it is...
Especially for these guys. They look pretty extreme, Tom.
Yeah. Even the ski jumpers have a team behind them. So these are not ski jumpers. This is the internet phenomenon known as the picture of Microsoft from 30, 40 years ago, and there's Bill Gates on the bottom left. And with a nice quote from Margaret Mead. But it really is true, isn't it? These are teams that you are investing in. They're not just groups of people or a couple of founders. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with that said, though, the folks on the call, what should they do about their own personal skills? Because as you'll hear later, we had a lot of fun putting together a course on this material. And I think this stuff can be learned, and so do you. So let's talk a little bit about, well, what do you mean stuff? What kind of skills can be taught or should be learned in our view? At Stanford, we, whether we're coming from the design crew or the entrepreneurship units, we like to think that we're in the business as educators of creating T-shaped people, whether they're freshmen, whether they're graduate students, or whether they're
professors.
Professors, yeah, and other professionals already launched in their career. That means they're really, really good at a particular discipline. I was good at computer science, for example, but having a breadth of knowledge in entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership, and that's what we think we can teach that as well. Just like you can learn a lot about computer science, you can learn that. Now, these are some of my favorite skills that we teach with our 30 some odd courses in entrepreneurship that are sponsored out of the engineering school, including to undergrads. There's strategic thinking skills up there above, like opportunity evaluation and comfort with change. There are interpersonal skills like persuasion, which is another way of saying selling, and communication, like what we're doing today. And there's the aforementioned teamwork one. And then there's even just, basic knowledge of finance and accounting. What do you think about this?
I think the most important skill for an entrepreneur to hone is that of opportunity evaluation. The toughest thing to identify when you're starting a company is what's the market opportunity, what's the market need, and what product serves that market need. And opportunity evaluation is that ability to look at a market such as mobile phones in 2007 and realize that you need to build something like the iPhone to completely disrupt this market, which is being poorly served by an existing solution. Now, along with opportunity evaluation is comfort with failure, because there are many, many, many startups that are created to get one Dropbox or one Uber or one Google or one Apple. And that is it's two sides of the same sheet of paper, which is if you're great at opportunity evaluation, on the other side, you're going to have a lot of failures in that process.
That's a great addition to that list. So let's go to number 7. And our final one, sort of, because we have a bonus one that we've thrown in since we're doing so well on time. And 7 is, are you making meaning and scaling your vision at your venture? This sort of ties back to the first one, which is, there are big problems in the world.
Yep.
That need solving so that this planet can flourish in this century, just like, the Renaissance turned things around in the 1400s in Florence. So how is this going to happen? Well, it goes down to the individuals and the individual teams. How are they going to make meaning and scale this big purpose? We love this debate. It's been going on in Silicon Valley in a very healthy way ever since HP, but especially in the last 20 years when a professor in a business school who's now living in Colorado wrote the first of a series of books, Built to Last, there in the top right, then Good to Great, and Great by Choice. And then it was amplified by Sheryl Sandberg's book last year, Lean In, where she talks about having a purpose. That it isn't about making money. And I remember when you were a student in our entrepreneurship courses in 1999, were they about making money?
Nope.
No,
making meaning.
Making meaning, or making a meaningful or purposeful venture. So it sounds trite, but it's really truly at the heart of entrepreneurship. Do you have any other thoughts about that?
Absolutely. At our firm we have a saying called success with significance. That success
like that.
On its own is insufficient, but significance is what really matters. And I think it's relevant to look at history. If you look at history, there's a lot of people who made money. The people who are remembered are not those who purely made money, or certainly they're not judged by whether or not they made money, but they're judged by whether or not they made impact. And so as you think about the entrepreneurial opportunities in your life and around you, think about solving problems that will end up being impactful if those solutions work. It is, having been around a lot of startups as both an operator and an investor, I can tell you one of the most interesting dynamics is that it is harder to solve a small, meaningless problem than to solve a large, hairy, important problem. Because when you're going after a big, hairy, important problem, you can attract great people to help you do it. If you're going after a small, meaningless problem, you're not going to get really great people to help you with it.
Well, in fact, we used, if you recall, we still use Jim Collins' book and phrase big, hairy, audacious goals.
Absolutely.
That came out of the book. I'm sorry.
BHAG.
BHAG's out of Built to Last. So that's a universal theme in entrepreneurship. Okay. So what we've done over the last half hour is talk about 7 different ways to learn about entrepreneurship. That's our message this morning, that opportunities are much more than just an idea. The elevator pitch is a great way of encapsulating strategy. You know, had a little fun with the Renaissance of saying no bankers, no Renaissance. Well, at least let's understand sources of capital today and the trends and their pros and advantages and disadvantages of each. That the lean startup movement is significant, and it's wonderful to see that embodiment of the scientific method that, hey, that's been around since the Renaissance. The fact that entrepreneurship is not an individual thing. It is a team sport. It's extreme, but it's a team sport. Ultimately, we're all trying to become better T-shaped people, and there's nothing more important than making meaning in order to achieve scale. It's not just about making money. So I'm looking at Paul, seeing if we got a little bit more time. Can we do the bonus? Can we do? All right. So, all right. We are eager to talk about this because we realize, and chi-hua touched on it earlier, there's a lot of people on this webinar who are saying, well, this is fine. You know, it's kind of interesting and recreational to hear about how some of those Silicon Valley style startups around the world get underway. But what does this have to do with me as a corporate leader and manager? What does it have to do with it? And I was thinking about another ex-student from the 90s who's worked at a lot of corporations, and I had this discussion with her, Mariah Finley, who's now CEO of a startup, but in her old days, she worked at Motorola and eBay, really big companies. And she wrote down a couple of like Uber principles. Pick a driver as leader and measure and fund like a VC. So in the interest of time, I won't spend too much time on the top half, but since I've got you here, who does venture capital, I'd love to get your reactions to these things she says here. Give big amounts of money based on the stage of development, allow for growth potential before moving into metrics mode, and then give it 2 or 3 times longer to pay off than you would think. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Tom. It's just like thinking like a VC inside of a large company, because as a operational leader inside a company, you're making investment decisions. There's a great book called Outsiders, which really talks about the best CEOs of the last 100 years. And those were CEOs. They were all very, very different people, but what they held in common was they all thought like capital allocators inside of their businesses. They made decisions based upon what's going to be the best investment for the long term to create shareholder value. That's essentially what venture capitalists do. We do it with raw startups, and the people who are on the phone today do it with raw ideas inside of their companies. And so I think absolutely building the skill set and the framework for thinking like a venture investor inside your company can pay dividends long term.
All right. Well, I hope that helps stimulate all the folks on the webinar, whether they're contemplating being part of a small business who wants to be big, or they're part of a big business who wants to innovate again. You know, and I hope everybody found some value out of this. I want to think of another quote. You used just a great quote about the one from the firm, the success with significance. Success with significance. Yeah. All right, so building on that, I have a favorite quote from Louis Pasteur, and it's luck favors the prepared mind. Mm-hmm. So I just urge everybody to keep getting prepared, no matter what stage of life you're in, you know, whether you're in college now or whether you are entering some other part of your life, just always prepare, always prepare. We've got some, you know, slam dunks here, layups for you on how to prepare. That this particular seminar is hopefully a gateway to want to learn more. We've got lots of videos and courses. You're going to hear about one in particular that you and I got to do, which we were just so pleased to be asked to do. Those are some of the books that were mentioned. I like this new book, The Outsiders. Should add that to it.
So with that, I'd like to open up to questions and answers. We have a number of questions here, some of which are highlighted. And gentlemen, please take it away. Get the best questions up and answer them.
All right. I will read it off, and then we'll take it from there, chi-hua. All right. First one is, does all entrepreneurship have to be disruptive? Does starting a new business and imitating existing companies also qualify as entrepreneurship?
All entrepreneurship does not have to be disruptive, Tom, but it needs to be something that you're passionate about, because entrepreneurship is hard. There will be difficult times when you start your own business or you start your own venture, and because it's hard, it's your passion that's going to carry you through. If you are passionate about building great cribs, handmade baby cribs, or making a great cup of coffee, that's the grounds on which to start a new business or start a new venture. But it's the passion that ultimately is important. If you just want to make some money, there's a lot easier ways to make money than starting your own business. But if you really want to solve problems, that's what you do. You start a company.
Yeah, and my take on this is this word disruption, which is used a good bit, and it shouldn't scare people away, because I think folks immediately think we're talking about disruption in technology, which happens. But that's usually a big platform shift, of which there's tons of opportunity to build companies based on that. And we've seen this over and over, from going from mini computers to personal computers to the internet to social networking, just keeps right on going. So that's Facebook as a platform, or that sort of thing. But the flip side of that coin is disruptions in business models.
Yeah. It definitely exists.
There's just as much innovation opportunity there, right? And you've invested in companies where the business model was disruptive, but the technology wasn't.
In many cases, that's what happens. And I'd say disruption can just be fundamentally improving things. Disruption is not as complicated as it sounds. When you're disrupting something, you're taking away or you're replacing something that's not working very well.
Yeah, I think of my own experiences. I'm trying to just get to one that I could say quickly. Well, I'll just put it this way. A philosophy that I've adopted for a while and then observed that it seems to fit a lot of situations is that your job as an entrepreneurial team is to connect a lot of dots.
Yep, exactly.
Bob Sutton in a paper long ago with Andy Hargadon called it knowledge brokering. Mm-hmm. You just take other disruptions and just combine them into a unique way.
A classic example was when I was in school here with you, Tom. The Facebook was a piece of paper or a bundle of paper, a book that you actually had slid under the door of your dorm room the very first day you got there.
Yeah.
And when Mark got to Harvard, he thought, well, we have the web. We have the ability for people to recognize whether or not they know each other. Let's just put this thing online. That's a classic disruption of a poor product with a much more superior product that then led to a lot of opportunities going forward.
Agreed, yeah. So I'm going to see how many of we can get through here. I feel like a talk show host. This is kind of fun. All right. This is from Johns Hopkins. Hello, Johns Hopkins. How are social enterprises different from classical startups in terms of the challenge? Oh, my goodness. I wish I had the faculty associated with our entrepreneurship center here in the room, and we could spend the rest of the day debating this. Social entrepreneurship is really important, and social innovation is really important. Yet, guess what? There's a number of us feel that exactly what we were talking about 45 minutes ago when we said there's big problems to solve in the world. That is social entrepreneurship. It's just being handled by a for-profit company.
Yeah.
Now, there are nonprofit entities that go after big problems, but they can use these same principles. So there's the line. It's a little bit of a false dichotomy that when we're talking about these kinds of growth enterprises, they can be nonprofits or they be for-profits. They just can have a socially responsible mission.
Yeah. And I think these are businesses, and I call them businesses because they really have the ability to be world-class businesses that are addressing very large market opportunities with disruptively better products. And the distinction I'd make is it's just a slightly different business model. So one of my best friends is a guy named Scott Harrison, and he's the founder of
we had him speak here. Yeah.
I would say, bar none, Scott is one of the best entrepreneurs in the world. Bar none, the market opportunity he's pursuing is one of the largest ones in the world, bringing clean water to 800 million people. That's a pretty large market opportunity. Bar none, his product is disruptively better than what exists today. You can go to Charity Water, you see the way they use technology and branding and productizing all of their services. The one thing that's different is his business model. He doesn't sell anything. He is essentially enabling people to participate in the implementation of those products out in the field, and that's just slightly different from the average Silicon Valley startup that might sell things or sell.
Well, I urge people to, and thank you for introducing him to us. In our seminar that we co-produce with SCPD every Wednesday afternoon, we had him speak, and so it's available for free, like all those up on the web. So if you Google Scott Harrison and his Stanford talk, you can see him talking about this very thing. So that's great. If you are building a company using personal or as we call them, friends, families, and fools funds, and let's assume that you're breaking even in the first year, at what stage of the company's history do you need to involve venture capital?
So venture capital is a very unique funding source, which is only appropriate if you want to take on a lot of risk to achieve a lot of scale. If you're starting a coffee shop and you want to go from one coffee shop to 2, 3, or 4 coffee shops, venture capital is not appropriate for you. If you've got a coffee shop and you want to roll it out to 10,000 coffee shops in 50 countries, that's the point at which you should bring on a
Starbucks. That's when he took on.
Exactly.
I mean, in fact, he took on venture capital.
He did. He did. And it turned out to be a great venture capital investment, but it came with a lot of risk. And the reason is, in that capital slide you put forward, Tom, venture capitalists in the center of that chart there, they expect a very, very high degree of return. And they're willing to take on a very, very high degree of risk. If you just want to scale a lifestyle business from 1 to 2 stores, don't take VC.
All right. Well put. Let's take a look at another question. Really simple one. What are our tips on building a successful team? Wow. This is a good one. I'm panicking because I got so much to say. I want to come up with some interesting soundbite because it is so important, and I'll have to just personalize it. What am I trying to do when we're building out these units for entrepreneurship education at Stanford or for the nation? And I'm thinking that I like unusual people. I mean, I want to make sure they're not all the same. We have a way of putting this, even when we're selecting students in that program you were in. It's like outfitting a living room, and you don't want all couches. You know, I mean, you want coffee table and chairs and rugs and paintings and so forth. So, and sometimes maybe you want a Picasso, you know, a really uncreative and unusual one. So I think that's one. The other in putting together a team is transparency and communication. I mean, as the leader, share everything. Because in this world, and in this world that we live in of digital, you know, just digital communications to the max and information's everywhere, any other way of leading or managing is not going to build a lot of teamwork.
I agree. And your friend Jim Collins, he has a couple good principles, and I'm not going to quote him perfectly here, but in principle what he says is, 1, make sure that you have A players at every single seat around the table.
Right.
Do not ever accept mediocrity on your team. They may be your best friend, but if they're not the best person to do that job, you need to be intellectually honest with yourself. And secondly, make sure you have the right people in the right seats. A lot of times you have great people that might not be doing the best job not because they're not great, but because they're not in the right role.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's terrific. Okay, so let's look at the next one there. If a VC sees a great team with a compelling idea, but that team has tried a previous venture and failed, does the VC regard that as a negative? I mean, I'll put it in chi-hua's. Does chi-hua want to hear what happened in the previous venture? I think it's a good one to finish on.
Yeah, this is fantastic because I think this is what makes Silicon Valley so unique. And you talked at the beginning, Tom, about Silicon Valley being a state of mind. I think Silicon Valley may be the only place in the world where failure is viewed as a badge of honor. I failed, you failed. We've all been involved in companies, advising or investing in companies that have failed. And the reason that failure is so important is because you learn just as much from failure, if not more, than from success.
Well, I'm telling you, though, chi-hua, and this is what's so exciting about the last 10 years. I've been able to teach this material in Abu Dhabi, Santiago, Helsinki, Taiwan, Singapore, Beijing, New York, and this issue comes up. So this generation of people, thanks to the internet, you know, the flat world and so forth, is not going to accept the old way where failure was somehow failure. They see it as data collection. They see it as the scientific method. So in fact, I think this principle might have been rarefied at Silicon Valley, but it's spreading. And it gives me great hope and optimism. All right. So with that, I'll turn it back to Paul.
Chi-hua, Tom, thank you so much. There are many, many more dimensions that we could cover, but unfortunately we're limited to time, and we do try to keep the time frame. I just want to remind you, for those of you who are not familiar, the Stanford Innovation and Entrepreneurship Certificate consists of a number of courses from which you select core and elective offerings to complete the certificate, and we've had a number of people run through that, so we're very pleased with the early outcomes there. I do want to make mention that we do appreciate our faculty spending time to join us. We will be answering a few of the additional questions online, so if you're still online, please hang in there. We might be able to get to those questions. And do join us in future webinars as your time permits. We do archive everything on our channel, so you'll be able to access that as well. And with that, I want to again thank our speakers, Professor Tom Byers, Chi-hua Chen, and we want to wish you a very good day wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
All right, so let's get on over to the first slide where it says the art and science of entrepreneurship, which is what we're going to try to do, Chi-hua, in about 40 minutes, which is the length of 2 TED Talks. So we better get at it. The approach that we're going to use, everyone, is I'm going to more or less do a play-by-play. We're feeding off the sports analogy because there's a Super Bowl in the United States on Sunday, and then shortly thereafter there's the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Russia. So we'll just stay on that theme, and this is the year of the World Cup as well. So Chi-hua, you get to be the color commentary or advisor, analyst. I get to yell goal at one point, but you can and so we continually look at this issue of, okay, if we're talking about entrepreneurship and we're talking about technology entrepreneurship, which is another way of saying high growth entrepreneurship, scalable businesses, not small businesses, but scalable large businesses like what you're trying to do with Spotify or what you did when you invested in Twitter or before that in your early investment in Facebook. We are trying to look at what's the principles associated with that. A good friend has a way of breaking it into 2 parts, opportunity recognition and pursuit of opportunity. Up above, you see this collision of products and markets, so we're going to talk about some principles having to do with that. And then down below, where in the pursuit of opportunity, we're going to look at some principles around resources and capital and people and organization. So we've got this down to 7 principles. Now, that's a wordy slide. Very, very aware of that. These are archived, so I won't step through each one, but that's what we're going to do over the next half an hour. So let's get started, crystallize them. So we better do just definitions first. These variations range from the entrepreneur Daniel, as you mentioned, or the Zuckerbergs, the Michael Dell, the Bill Gates type, all the way to discussion of entrepreneurial ecosystems or clusters, which I've mentioned. Start saying, hey, Silicon Valley is a cluster, but frankly, it's repeated in all kinds of other habitats around the world. What we're going to do, though, in the interest of time, is look at the 2 in the middle. And that is entrepreneurship as a process, so maybe you could call that science of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurial, the adjective, as attitudes and skills and behaviors, in other words, the art. So let's do that and bound it that way. So thanks, Paul, for talking about the fact that I've got a textbook. In fact, today, the 4th edition of this textbook is available.
Congratulations, Tom. It's awesome.
Yeah, just 2 years of a lot of coffee and a wonderful co-author in Andrew Nelson.
I think it's a state of mind. It's about solving problems that you're passionate about in a creative and scrappy way. And that really applies anywhere. It's simply a way of thinking. An example I'll give you is our friend Daniel Ek, who's the founder of Spotify. He was sitting in Sweden, and he was incredibly frustrated with the fact that he could not pay to legally download music. And so he came up with a product and a service that enabled people all the world around to subscribe to an unlimited library of music and pay a monthly fee. Now, not everyone is going to be a Daniel Ek. Not everybody is going to start a company like Spotify. But within your own companies, in your communities, in your homes, you can apply entrepreneurial thinking to identify problems that you're really passionate about, and you solve them in a creative way.
Well, let me build on that, and I don't know how many times I'm going to probably say that in the next half hour, because you always say interesting things, but let me build on that by saying, look, there's a lot of variations to the word entrepreneurship, and us academics are always trying to figure out how to, you can jump in anytime we want.
All right, let's do it.
So we are sitting in Silicon Valley, and what is it? It's this landmass on this planet around San Francisco and San Jose, but it really, in our view, is a state of mind. So the things that we're going to discuss about the art and science of entrepreneurship can be seen through a Silicon Valley lens. That's where we live and it's where we study. Chi-hua was a student of mine, I was proud to say, 15 years ago, before he started his distinguished career. So here we are, using Silicon Valley as a lab, but there are lots of Silicon Valley type clusters all over the world. So we believe that the things we're going to talk about over the next half hour are applicable anywhere on the planet. So let's talk about, well, what do we mean by entrepreneurship? So I'll give you the opportunity here to chime in.
Well, I totally agree with you, Tom.